Greetings, Earthlings. Hope you're all doing well. I'm back at you again with perhaps one of the most important videos I'll ever make, but you already know that if you've been watching for a while, because it always is. And thank you for everyone who has supported the channel up to this point. The small handful of you that consistently watch these videos they're really who have kept me going up to this point. So 50 subscribers, big deal. I'll say that in another video, which I already recorded, but I'm not going to put it out till later. So I just want to say thank you now, and that it really does mean a lot. And also that the channel's going to be doing some interesting and novel stuff, let's put it that way. I've kind of fallen into a rhythm with this style of video, and while that's great, I'm really excited to try some new things. So get keen for some interesting stuff to be coming along in the next few weeks. But today we're going to be doing the classic, the freeform jazz exposition on a concept that I think is really important to recognize and unpack, especially in the modern day, and I don't see a lot of it. And what that is the concept of predatory versus prey vision, and then the role of presence or mindfulness or zazen practice or whatever you want to call it in moderating these two things. Because I've found in the last few years, this has continued to come into my mind that this is an important thing to recognize and kind of recognize in yourself, right? Introspectively, it's an extremely valuable tool. So I'm going to first establish this dichotomy between predatory and prey vision, right? So you've got two ways of looking at the world, if you like, as an organism. And I think all organisms look at the world in these two ways to some degree, but some certainly much more than others. And the way that you can tell, one way you can tell the preference of one organism for looking at the world one way rather than the other is the orientation of their eyes. So as I'm looking at you in the webcam, I am focusing my vision. There's a focal point and I'm concentrating straight ahead. And so that is what I would call, in a very literal sense, predatory vision. I'm focusing on something. Whereas when you look at prey vision, you'll see a lot of animals have their eyes basically on the sides of their head, right? So you can think a lot of birds are like this, a lot of cows, and various animals which they primarily graze or are herbivorous, and they have specialized instead of having laser focused eyesight like this, they see everything in their peripheral vision so that they can be aware of threats that are coming in from any side potentially. And so they've adapted, they've evolved that way, and that's extremely valuable for them given their environment and their role within the ecosystem, right? So that's very straightforward, but it's just important to point that out, that some animals specialize in one or the other, but that all animals do both, right? And, case in point, you'll sometimes see a bird kind of looking at you and it'll turn its head. Have you ever seen that? It sort of really pays attention to you. So it's not like it can't do that. It's just, it's not evolved to do that as well as humans who have extremely good vision, predatory vision, but our prey vision suffers somewhat because our peripheral vision is fundamentally limited in a way that a bird's isn't. But we do both. And because we do both, we have to be aware of when we're doing one or the other and what the existential consequences of that are. So that's what I really want to get into today, because I think it's very easy to lose track of exactly when you're doing what. And either of them have drawbacks. And in fact, what I'm going to try to establish in this video is that actually, not only do they both have drawbacks, they actually both have similar drawbacks, which are unavoidable if you're just constantly bouncing between one and the other. So you need a third or a different state of consciousness, which I'm calling here presence or mindfulness, that can actually regulate the balance between the two. So let's take a classic example, because of course in the modern day as human beings, we are neither predators nor prey in a conventional sense, right? It's unusual at the very least for a modern human living in an urban environment to be literally being attacked by predators or literally attacking prey animals as a predator. That doesn't happen a lot. However, society is a little bit like a jungle sim, if you like, where even though we aren't literally doing that, within our field of consciousness, we are often experiencing the world in that way. And it serves society to drive us forward, for us to be constantly in that state of mind, because it makes us maximally productive, at least in the very short term. So let's say you're at your job. In the city I live, there are a lot of bureaucrats, public servants, but just generally office jobs I think work like this too. Let's say you have to check your emails on some level. So let's say you're sitting at your desk and you're just kind of existing, and then this thing comes into your gestalt. Okay, so I'm going to use this word gestalt, and it's an important concept, meaning just your field of consciousness, your field of awareness. Okay, at least that's what I'm using it to mean here. So into your gestalt comes this threat, if you like, which is that you have to check your emails. So this little voice in your ear, or this little, this thing comes into your mind's eye, and it's like, you should probably check your emails, buddy. And you go, oh no, I really should probably check my emails. And you register that as, on some subconscious level, potentially an existential threat, because there could be a difficult email in there, or a bad email, right? Or there could just be something that you really just can't be bothered dealing with right now, that is going to be like in your grill saying, you have to deal with me right now. And so in that sense, when you're engaging in that way with this thing that's coming into your gestalt, you're in predatory vision. You're in prey vision, right? Because you're just sort of sitting there relatively ambiently, waiting to deal with threats as they come, and now this threat has come. And now you go into this thing that people are so fond of calling fight or flight, okay? Now I'm not talking about a literal physiological fight or flight where you get an adrenaline surge and all that, although I wouldn't be surprised if some people who suffer from a lot of anxiety, they actually do start to get low-level physiological fight or flight reactions to things like realizing they should check their emails, right? They might get like an elevated heart rate or something like that. But in most cases, like the fight or flight I'm talking about is more that you just mentally have to respond to this threat somehow. And you've got two ways of going about it. So you've got fight or you've got flight. Okay, so now we're gonna start with flight, okay? Flight in this situation is not literally getting up from your desk and going, fuck, I have to get out of here, these emails are gonna get me, and like running down the hall, right? Of course, because the email, you can't escape the emails like that, because the emails are in your field of awareness. They're not something that you can physically run away from, obviously. So you have to deal with the emails, the email threat in a different way, and that is where procrastination becomes an extension of the prey vision modus operandi. In other words, procrastination, in this context at least, is a consequence of you choosing to remain as prey or as a victim in your mentality vis-a-vis these emails, right? So now maybe in order to escape, in order to have this thing that's commanding your attention, in order to flee from that effectively, what you're going to have to do is find a distraction. And so that distraction could be scrolling on your phone, could be going and getting some food, it could be talking to a colleague, right? There are all kinds of ways that you can take your mind off this thing. However, you're still basically afraid, right? You're still in that in that prey mode, because everything that you choose to do, the threat of the emails are still looming, right? So it's almost like if you're eating your food or scrolling on your phone, it's almost like when you see if an animal's been spooked and it runs away, eventually it's going to have to start eating and stuff. But if it's grazing there and it knows the predator's still around, it's going to be stressed, right? It's going to be looking around going, okay, I'm just going to keep eating. There's nothing I can really do as prey here than just to pray the thing doesn't come back and pay very careful attention to my environment. So there's like this hyper awareness of like you're grazing, but you're looking in the trees. You're like, it could come back at any second. I have to be ready, right? So in that instance, even though you might be eating food, scrolling, whatever, you're not enjoying that thing to the fullest. You're really instead dealing with an elevated level of stress constantly. And so it's not an ideal solution, right? Because of course the only way to resolve that stress is to deal with this looming threat of the emails, okay? So now let's take the other option, okay? So let's say instead you decide you're gonna do the grind set alpha move of just taking these emails on head on. You know what I mean? You're going, you know what, emails, it's just you and me, you son of a bitch. You know what I mean? Call an ambulance, but not for me, right? Here we go, emails, like let's do this thing. Well, now you're switching from your prey vision into predatory vision. You go, here we fucking go, right? And you open up your Microsoft Outlook or whatever the fuck, and you look these emails dead in the eye, and you're like, I'm gonna kill these emails. I'm gonna just like, one by one, destroy these emails within my gestalt, right? Again, not literally destroy them, not literally smashing your computer to pieces, because of course there'd be a temptation to do that, but you know, because of the way everything's set up in this world, that's not gonna fix your problem, right? So you're attacking the emails in the only way that is actually effective, which is like reading someone's garbled complaint about something, or like, you know, reading that you have to do some report by this date or whatever, and you just do that and you just go, yep. But of course, this, at least potentially, is still generating a stress response in you. You are still stressed. It's just that you are doing, quote unquote, the right thing by dealing with the problem that is in front of you, okay? And that's all well and good. But I think the issue here is that even if you get through all that experience scot-free, and the emails really are not as bad as you thought they are, which is usually the case, right? Once you get to the end of those emails, what happens? Well, your predatory vision now starts to roam around looking for some other problem to solve. And then you start to actually morph back and flick actually quite rapidly back into prey vision because now you're going, okay, I've solved that problem. I'm aware in the abstract that there are going to be more problems. Now I'm going to sit here and wait for those problems to arise again, right? So now I'm establishing this dichotomy between predatory vision and prey vision, which I think is important, but of course it's also important to say that really there is no difference between one and the other. The reason that that I'm establishing a dichotomy, that I'm making a distinction, is to add meaning to that distinction that makes it useful for us, right? In the same way that there's actually no real distinction between me and anything else. There's not really any distinction between me and you, right? That kind of way of thinking is called non-duality. But it's not, it annoys a lot of people, and for good reason, right? The fact is, though, that the reason that I'm pointing this out in the context of this predatory prey vision is because within one, the other actually exists, right? Because if you're a predator, if you're in that predator mode, once you find the thing that you're seeking, hunting after, now in order to get it, your mind has to expand out into a prey vision modality, right? So some people with this consciousness thing, they'll instead of saying predator and prey vision, they'll say like laser focus versus lamp focus, where it's illuminating lots of stuff. So let's say you're a literal predator, you're out in the jungle and you see an animal that you want to hunt, right? Well, yes, you lock in on that animal for a second, but then you have to expand it out and you have to go, okay, how am I going to navigate this environment? And what is the best way for me to approach this animal, right? So you start looking broadly, you start with a focus view, you move out broadly, but it's all quite stressful. Similarly, with the predatory vision, with the prey vision, sorry, I keep saying predatory instead of prey. If you look out in a broad context, what you're really looking for is a specific thing that could be a threat to you at any given moment. And once you identify that thing, now you transition into predatory focused vision on that thing, because now you know I have to get the fuck away from that thing and I have to be aware of exactly where that thing is. What that thing is and where it is more important than anything else in my field of vision, right? So then often you're just going to run the other way. But even by running the other way, you're very much concentrating on the thing that you're running away from, right? But also it's stressful. So you can't escape the stress of predatory vision by just swapping into prey vision, and you can't escape from the stress of prey vision by swapping into predatory vision, because they're both stressful states of mind. And again, society is trying to make you be stressed in that way all of the time, because they both have this property of like you're seeking a problem to solve, or in other words, you're seeking something to do. And you always have to have something to do, right? Yes, of course you have to always have fucking something to do, because that's just the way it is. So let's say you've got a to-do list, right? And that's like, people's like, yeah, this is it, right? We got there. So this goes back to my video, Tyranny of the Timetable. All well and good to have one of these beautiful to-do lists. Problem is though, this is just like the maximally efficient way of just swapping between predatory and prey vision constantly. you're like, all right, what do I have to do? Oh, I know I have to do something. All right, write this list. Okay, all right, now what do I have to do? This thing. Okay, I'm gonna go after this thing, I'm gonna do it. Yes, stressful, stressful, stressful. I've done it. Okay, what's the next thing I have to do? Let's go prey vision for a second. I'm looking at the list. Oh, yeah, this one. All right, we do that, okay. And again, you can procrastinate. Like procrastination allows you to kind of hang out in your prey vision at a slightly lower stress level. And a lot of people, that's where that's their solution basically, is that they spend most of their life effectively literally being a victim in a sense, but just at a lower level where they're able to semi-reliably flee from the existential threats. But the problem is, because of course they're sacrificing that transition into prey vision, they can't really go after what they want in life, or at least it's very rare for them to actually do that because they're spending so much mental energy running away, right? So this is where I want to bring in presence, and this is like the creme de la creme of conscious awareness in terms of chilling the fuck out, because in the animal kingdom, we have this idea of homeostasis. I'm saying in the animal kingdom like I'm one of the animal kingdom. Of course, technically I am. But what I really mean is that animals, in biology, we have this thing called homeostasis, which you may have heard of before, but if you haven't, this is that state of mind where you're not at a height, you're not feeling threatened, and you're also not feeling like you need anything physiologically, right? So you have enough water, you have enough food. If you have a mating instinct, you've done that recently enough that you're not trying to find a mate. You're just chilling, okay? Homeostasis, homeostatic. And that is such a beautiful thing when you see it. And I think lizards are a really great example of this. Lizards spend a lot of their time in homeostasis, and reptiles in general, because they're like evolved to really conserve their energy. So you'll see a lizard and it's just sitting there on a tree, just 100% chilling, at least 98% chilling. And this is so alien to the human, modern at least, mind, because there are so many mechanisms in place to keep us in a constant state of stress that homeostasis is very uncommon. And again, just to reiterate this point, to the degree that we have a rich inner world, a mental dimension that we inhabit, we can actually be constantly inflicting either predatory or prey vision on ourselves habitually. And so it's because it's a habit of mind, the thing that happens is that it starts to kind of try and take dominance, take precedence over other habits of mind, like presence, which are much more understated. So we'll come back to presence in a second, but just to make that point about this kind of tendency for habits of mind to try and dominate things. I have run into this a lot in my quest to become an enlightened being in reference to health and fitness, right? Health and fitness has become something that's very interesting to me, both because I'm finding that I enjoy it more than I ever thought I would enjoy it, but also because it is just, it should be everyone's highest priority who's trying to take care of themselves, right? It's sort of the number one thing. But in the health and fitness community, there's a sort of elephant in the room, which is what's the best way to be to get in shape? What's the best diet to be on? Things of that nature, right? And what I find is, you can see even in the way I sort of phrase the question, so many people have this all or nothing approach. So you have calisthenics people who will say, yep, calisthenics is all you need. You just need to move your body around. Like, body weight exercises are completely sufficient to maximize muscle gain, to maximize cardiovascular fitness, blah, 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 right? They just say, yeah, everything is packed into this thing that I do that is calisthenics, right? So they're like team calisthenics. And then you have the powerlifting, compound lift gang, and they'll say, yeah, everything you need for muscle gain, cardiovascular fitness, etc., is in just compound lifts, which just means like lifting basically, lifting really heavy, let's just put it that way, or lifting in a way where it uses all your muscles. So things like bench press, deadlift, barbell squat, stuff like that. So they'll just go, I'm team powerlifting, and powerlifting is all you need, right? These calisthenics people implicitly, like, it's not, I don't think they would deny the validity of calisthenics, but they certainly don't affirm the validity of it enough to do it themselves. It's like they've become so obsessed with the idea that the habit of mind that they're operating within is the habit of mind, that they just discount all the others, right? And there's like confirmation bias and all kinds of things that go in, like the engines that perpetuate this psychological tendency. But it's really across the board, right? From religion, political leanings, et cetera, et cetera. There's this tendency where a habit of mind, be it an ideology or a behavioral pattern, et cetera, attempts to perpetuate itself. Even if you're like, let's say you're at a party and you don't know a lot of people, you might find yourself sort of adopting a persona. Like maybe the first couple of interactions you have with people, you're being funny, and then from there on, you're the funny guy now, right? Or you're the fun-loving, dancing guy, or you lean more into being the introspective, deep conversation in the corner guy. And there's a sense in which that kind of carries you forward. It just sort of it seems to just perpetuate in a loop. You just become this thing. And that's one of the, I'm going to get back to presence in a minute, but I think that's one of the things that is such a mercy of death in this cosmos. This is one of the reasons why death, I think, is an essential component in the life cycle, so to speak. Whether we are like spiritual, immortal beings, or actually just legitimately mortal, there's a tendency for us to get stuck in these loops. And normally when we're in a loop of some kind, it's not necessarily a good thing. We're often stuck in cycles of torment and things of that nature, right? And that's what I'm really talking about here. So that's what I'm trying to resolve. But to do that, you have to realize if you habitually vacillate between predatory and prey vision, or if you habitually try to remain in predatory vision all the time, like in a sort of like alpha overachiever type thing, or if you try to habitually remain in prey vision all the time, procrastinating, just kind of going with the path of least resistance, then you are strongly habituated to continue to do that, and you probably even have moral underpinnings in some sense, like internalized beliefs about why that's the right thing to do rather than other things. So just be aware of that as I start to move into this presence thing, because presence is a wild card, right? I don't think it's even been something that was really seriously thought about in the West in the last 50 years or so, outside of maybe like monastic circles, like a few kind of religious institutions might have been at least familiar with this idea from the context of like contemplative prayer and stuff like that. But you can absolutely unplug from all of this, right? And there are lots of philosophies that and religions that actually converge on this as a solution to a lot of stuff, right? And I don't think I want to go fully into all the problems that it solves today, because I've already been talking for half an hour, and I know that that's a lot for most people, including myself. I also find this experience somewhat exhausting at times, but I really do think I need to make this point to you. But needless to say, the fact is you can achieve that homeostatic feeling that other animals in the animal kingdom, which we are a part of, can experience. But because we have this mental dimension that is always kind of right up in our face, if you like, you can't do it by simply just resolving all of the threats or physiological needs or desires in your immediate environment, because you never will. The nature of the to-do list is that it's never ending, right? Especially in our sort of individualistic, highly ambitious culture. You could have a thing with you could have a to-do list with 5 things on it, and you would do those 5 things and you would find another 5 things. And if you really got through all of the things, then you would feel like that's a character flaw, right? And you would go, maybe I should just like go climb Everest or something. I got to find something to do, right? Presence is unplugging from that. And if you can't do that, you're going to be stressed for basically your entire life. And some people actually think that that's what life is. In fact, I know a lot of people who are highly invested in the idea that that's actually what life is. It's just really a never-ending series of stressful events. And you can see from the perpetual motion machine that I've told you, that I've set up for you here, this pendulum swing between one kind of vision and another. They are indeed trapped within a never-ending cycle of essentially suffering, right? Samsara. See, so or dukkha, I guess more accurately. If we're going to talk about it in a Buddhist context, you can actually see that the Buddhist practice of mindfulness, which of course they didn't really think of it in those terms, but focusing on the breath, bringing yourself into the moment, a constant attentive practice, cultivating this discipline and this habit of mind actually is the solution. And it comes with a lot of problems when you actually try to do this, because your ego really pushes against it, because your ego believes that what you're trying to do is going to annihilate it, which I might add is, I think, untrue. The attitude I have now to the ego is that it's sort of like a child that you are in the custody of for your entire life. I think you should have a great deal of compassion for your ego. I think you should have a lot of respect for your ego, because in a sense it has a primal wisdom, just like a child does. So trying to like violently suppress your ego is not something that I think is wise. Like, you actually have to let it express itself, just like you should let a child express itself. But the habits of mind that you've been stuck in your entire life potentially are going to make this presence thing seem like an existential threat that you have to deal with by either running away from it or trying to annihilate it, which basically means like dismantling it ideologically, right? Like, you'll go Well, if I'm just completely present, just chilling like a lizard on a stick, then how am I ever going to get anything done, right? What about all my motivations are going to go away? What about planning? This is like such a big one. People say, what about planning? I think planning is great. Planning is great. Planning is super important. And again, the mistake is to think that presence has to be this all or nothing affair, where once you give yourself over to this state of consciousness, it's going to like try and become king, right? It's going to try and take over everything. And some people who have, I think, allowed presence to become the lord and master of their mental domain, like for example, Eckhart Tolle, who wrote a very important book called The Power of Now. I think it's fair to say that he is overzealous in asserting the utility and efficacy of presence. And so I think he unfortunately has been beguiled by that state of consciousness come ideology, which to the degree that he's always trying to find like ways to just say that either the other things aren't as necessary as you think, or that the other things can be done using presence. And then he's like, gets in that, us versus them thing, where it's like, yeah, well, this is just you being deluded, just like the way powerlifters are with calisthenics people. They'd be like, you're just like, look how jacked I am or whatever, and you're just deluded thinking that you can like get there with your thing. A lot of people become that way with presence. It doesn't have to be that way. And at the start of it, it's not going to be that way because, if you do think of it like a muscle or like a discipline, like a habit that you're forming, if you've just been living in the classic society conditioned predatory versus prey mode, like your whole life, just bouncing between one or the other, or just sticking with one mostly and like begrudgingly going to the other when you really need to, the presence thing is going to be piss weak. And just like when you first start going to the gym, like if you're piss weak and you go to the gym, the only thing that's going to happen by next week is that you'll be very slightly less weak. You're not going to instantly become, have like Herculean strength, right? It's a very gradual thing. It's a discipline, which is why you have like Buddhist monks, Christian mystics, like Christian monks, I guess, spending their entire lives cultivating this kind of skill. But you don't have to spend your whole life cultivating this skill. I'm going to start wrapping this up now. The real point is that you must, for your own sake, find a way to escape this cycle. And society, and I know it's like society, who's society, right? Who's they? But I think you know what I mean. If you've grown up in a similar kind of malaise that I have, milieu, you'll find that it's not going to offer you an out. Like if you Google how do I deal with this stress of always having to get all this shit done, and it's like, well, make a to-do list, or like here's how you make a timetable and whatever, then you'd be like, okay, this person is trying to fight fire with fire, like they're trying to just make me suffer more efficiently, or like suffer in a way that I'm more efficient in getting things done for like effectively the hive mind, right? So you have to investigate presence in yourself, so if you're really interested in that, I have another video about the actual practice of presence itself called Anxiety and the Metronome, which I would recommend you go and check out. But honestly, and I said I have a gag going with one of my subscribers and regular viewers about deep awareness. But honestly, you would be just as well of like listening to that video as like clicking on that video, turning the sound off, and just trying to fall into a state of homeostasis or deep awareness where you're just sitting there experiencing things as they come up and not thinking about them as being threats or things that you should go after, right? You can see how this is kind of the quintessential, like ultimate meditative mindset. You're just observing. Everything is just passing through your consciousness like water under a bridge, and you're not judging, attacking, defending, reacting. You're simply experiencing things as fully as you possibly can. And if you really get that, if you can get to that point, it pays massive dividends. It's like learning a new instrument or learning a language. You don't just get out what you put in, you get out what you put in and then some in spades, right? Like the compound interest on this in terms of existential satisfaction and just cognitive skill is just off the chain, right? Because this is basically flow state. This is basically flow state on command. This is a portal to restoring the balance between those two extremes, right? Because if you go on one extreme, it's like when you're standing on one leg, and if you start falling too far one side, you kind of can correct for a sec, and then you just tumble all the way over. If you're too deep in either one of these, you either tip, the whole seesaw tips that way, or you try and correct and you go this way and then you're bouncing this way and this way. Presence is a portal to perfect balance. That's what flow state is, right? That's how I did this video, if you like. There's no two ways about that. What you just witnessed, whether you think it was like boring or unfocused or whatever, you could have all kinds of judgments about it. I could only do it by maintaining this balance of observing and reacting and sitting in the beautiful space betwixt, okay? So I wish you luck in your journey to do that. If you have any tips or cues, like things that really help you get there, then please let me know because I'm curious. And like, subscribe, do all that good shit, and I'll see you in the next one.